Are you having problems with flame failures on your cellar's boiler? Let me show you the leading cause of flame failures and how to fix it. Here we have a Sellers Manufacturing S-Series boiler. This is the front door. We've already flipped it open. Here we have the main nozzles. We have pilot runners. And then when we get into the flame failures, we're going to be looking at the spark rod. We're going to be looking at the main flame rod, and we're going to be looking at the pilot flame rod. These are essential for operation of the boiler. If these aren't right, you're not going to have correct boiler operation. So this spark rod is in the upper left-hand side of the boiler when you're looking at the back side of the front door. The spark rod needs to be gapped properly. We'll go over that. We have the pilot flame rod. When the pilot flame rod senses flame, it's going to send a signal back to the flame controller, which will then tell the boiler to go to main ignition. Main ignition comes out of these burner nozzles, and this flame rod will be your main burner flame rod. Now I'm going to show you how to replace the spark rod and the flame rods of the boiler. Here we have a diagram of the spark rod installation. Just a reminder that this diagram and others are in the Sellers Manufacturing Manual, which is helpful to reference when you have questions or need further information about the boiler. This manual and others can be found on Sellers Manufacturing website or from your local Sellers rep. Now let's get into how to replace the flame rod and spark rod on your boiler. So here, I've already loosened up the spark rod, but let's go over a couple components. Here we have a mounting plate. The mounting plate has some threads in it, and it's going to get bolted to the back side of the front door. You need 3 of these spark rods and flame rods. They're all the same part. As you will see, we have a long rod, we have an insulator at the end, we have an electrical connection, and then we have threads. The mounting plate is going to be threaded into the spark rod just like so. You don't have to tighten it too much with a wrench, and you don't need thread sealant. Here I've loosened the spark rod. You want to be careful when you take off the electrical connection that you do not lose the wire into the front of the boiler. I have the mounting plate on my spark rod. I'm going to make the electrical connection before I bolt up the mounting plate as the electrical connection gets pushed back into the door. Make sure to take a pair of pliers and to gently tighten the electrical connection so that it's snug. The wire shouldn't move. And then you're going to take the insulating boot and slide it down. So that it looks like so. Remove your bolts and slide the wire back into the front door and bolts up your mounting plate. Use a 7/16 wrench to tighten the bolt. Doesn't have to be crazy tight. All we're looking for is a snug fit. Now you'll notice that the new rod is straight and the old rod is bent. You want to make sure that you're not making the #1 mistake when bending the rod. Is not installing the insulator before you bend the rod. If you bend the rod, you won't be able to get the insulator on. The insulator supports the rod in its installation. The insulator is going to get ran through this support and clamped. That is crucial to make sure that this insulator is on. If you don't do that, you will be buying yourself a new flame rod. Now to make the bend, you're going to need 2 pairs of pliers. Doesn't matter too much what kind of pliers, but you're going to want to be able to gently grip the spark rod with the end of the pliers. So when you make the bends, there's no precise spot where you have to make the bend, but we need to make sure that our insulator ends up in this mounting point and that the end of the spark rod ends up over the pilot runner. The first bend we're going to have to do is to get the insulator down into the mounting point, which is going to be about 2 90-degree bends, about right where my pliers are. You can take your pliers and estimate it. You can also visually see it. I'm going to take the insulator off before the first 2 bends, but you need to be very mindful that you put the insulator back on after your 2 bends before you make your 3rd bend. You're going to grip your pliers on either end, and then with the plier closest to the end of the spark rod, you're going to twist and make your bend. Now you'll notice that I can't make a full 90-degree bend because this pilot runner is in the way. So I'm going to make the second bend. The second bend needs to line up so that our insulator is in the mounting plate, which is approximately going to be this far, maybe 4 or 5 inches. It's going to be different maybe on your boiler. So we're going to make a bend approximately right here. You can always tweak it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Now we'll make our second bend. Should be about 90 degrees, and then we'll go back to the first bend. Make that 90 degrees. If you did it correctly, you should be able to slide your insulator into the mounting plate. I've made mine a little bit far. So now we're going to adjust that a little bit. We're going to adjust this 90-degree bend up a little bit. It should be right around there. Like I said, nothing has to be perfect. We're just trying to make sure that this insulator gets mounted in this mount, and then we'll go on to the next bends. For now, you want to make sure that you attach the insulator into the mount before you make the next bend. Now that we have the insulator attached with the mounting bolt, the spark rod is supported. And now we need to make 2 bends so that the end of the spark rod ends up about 3/32 to 1/8 of an inch away from the top of the pilot runner. Our first bend is going to be about a 45 degree. We're going to want to bend it away from the vertical flasher, and we want to end up on this boiler about right here in the center between these 2 nozzles. You'll take your pair of pliers, make the bend. And if you look vertically down from the top, I can see that the middle of my spark rod is going to end up right over the end of the pilot runner. So now you still may be wondering what we're going to do with all this extra spark rod. We're going to end up cutting it. So this next bend doesn't have to be perfect. We're not trying to make this end right here end up here. We're going to be bending this down, and then we can cut the end so that we make sure that it's going to end up 3/32 to about 1/8 of an inch above the pilot runner. Now looking down, we'll make our second 90-degree bend. Just like so. And then you'll either take some bolt cutters, or I have some linesmen here, and we're going to end up cutting it approximately flush with the edge of the pilot runner, and then we'll make our final adjustments with just tweaking the bends that I just made. You can discard this end of the rod, and now, as we see on this diagram here, we want 3/32 to no more than 1/8 of an inch above the end of the pilot runner. So you're going to adjust your bends. So I'm going to bend it back just a little bit. Like I said, no real perfect science here. So now that I've bent the end is touching, and we need to make the gap per the drawing. You can use the end of the spark rod that you discarded as a feeler gauge, and we're going to make sure that this spark rod can just barely pass through the end of the spark rod to the pilot assembly. We're going to make small adjustments, bending it up. I'm going to use my pliers, bend it up a little bit more. I'm going to bend it in. So you'll see here, I bent it too much. The spark rod end is not touching the end cut off. If you have too much of a gap, you may have intermittent failures on pilot. So I want to bend this down and make sure that it's touching the end of this rod. So now I need to bend it back. Now I've made a couple bend adjustments, and now it brushes just the end of the spark rod. And we know that this rod is 3/32, so that now we have a proper adjustment of the spark rod. When the boiler heats up, you may need to make an adjustment on the gap of this as this rod may move, but that'll be different for every boiler situation. Now that we replaced the spark rod, we're going to take one of these. This is now going to be a flame rod. It's still the same part. As we said, there's no difference between this part and the spark rod that we just bent up. It's going to be much of the same. Procedure, but now these are just going to have a different function on the boiler. We're going to have our pilot. This is going to be the bottom hole on this wire. This is going to be our pilot flame rod. And then on the top hole on this wire is going to be our main flame rod. Our main flame rod is going to end up in front of one of the main burner nozzles, and our pilot flame rod is going to end up over this pilot runner extension on the side of the pilot runner here. Just as we did on the spark rod, we're going to start with the pilot runner flame rod. We're going to make our electrical connection. You're going to screw it on, and then you're going to just gently secure it. Make sure that the wire doesn't move, and then you're going to slide the insulating boot down over the connector. Next, we're going to take our mounting plate. We're going to thread it onto the pilot flame rod. We're going to snug it up. It doesn't have to be crazy tight, and you don't want to use any thread sealant or any tape on it. Next, we're going to mount the mounting plate onto the back side of the front door. You're going to take a 7/16 wrench and snug up the mounting plate. Doesn't have to be crazy tight. Remember, these mounting plates have to come off regularly when you replace the flame rod, so you don't want to strip out the bolts. They're only 7/16 heads. Next, just like the spark rod, we're going to end up bending the pilot flame rod. You want to make sure that you keep your insulator close. This insulator, just like the spark rod, gets put on this mounting plate. We can make two 90-degree bends before we need this insulator, but if you start bending the end of the pilot flame rod, you're not going to be able to get the insulator on, and then you're going to need a new part to start all over again. When you make your bends, we're going to be eyeing it up, so we'll see that the insulator needs to get attached to this point. So you're going to want to make your bend 1 to 2 inches after the end of this insulator on the mounting point that gets threaded into the mounting plate on the boiler. You're going to take your pliers. Always use 2 pairs of pliers. We're going to make a 90-degree bend. Now we need to make a second bend so that the insulator ends up here. So if you want, you can put an insulator in the view. The second bend needs to be approximately right here. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can always make adjustments afterwards. Just make sure you're not going to drop your insulator on the ground. We're going to make our second bend. Now that we made our second bend, you're going to slide the insulator on, adjust the mounting bracket to get the insulator in, and it should look like that. You're going to put your mounting bolt on your mounting clip. You're going to tighten it. Now that our pilot flame rod is extended over and supported by the insulator, we're going to cut off the end of the pilot flame rod. This will just make it easier working with it. You can always cut it a little bit longer if you're unsure of where you need to cut it, but we're going to bend down approximately 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch. So we're going to make up the 1/4 to 1/2 an inch and make it extra long here. So let me cut it. This isn't the final position of the pilot flame rod, but we're just cutting off the excess for now. Now let's make 2 small bends. So now that I made 2 small bends, we want approximately a 1/2 inch over the top of the tube. Mine is a little bit close, so I'm going to want to bend it up so that we have a 1/2 inch. So I've made the adjustments. If you do need to make a small adjustment, you can change the mounting point. It does slide a little bit, and then you can tighten the other side of the mounting point that is on the pipe nipple of the main burner nozzle. We can measure this. I don't know if you can see this on. Yep. But we have approximately a 1/2 inch of the pilot flame rod above the top of the pilot runner. So now you'll notice that the pilot flame rod is sticking out of the pilot runner. We can always clip it. You're going to clip it approximately right at the corner of the pilot runner. Now that it's clipped, I've measured we're a 1/2 inch over the top of the pilot runner, and we are centered directly over the holes of the pilot. So now that our pilot flame rod will be able to sense the pilot flame of the pilot runners. Now let's move on to the main flame rod that we're going to connect to this wire here. So on the main flame rod, just like the other ones, we're going to connect the wire. You're going to tighten it down with a pair of pliers. You're going to make sure that the wire doesn't move. And you're going to slide the insulating boot over the end. We're going to take our mounting plate. We're going to slide it up. We're going to thread our mounting plate onto the main flame rod. Mounting plate is secured. And now we're going to secure the mounting plate to the back side of the front door. You're going to tighten it gently with your 7/16 wrench. You're just going to snug up the bolts. Now once again, we're going to make 2 small bends before we put our insulator on. The insulator needs to be attached to this mounting point here. So we're going to make a small bend, and then for the insulator to be here, we need to traverse about 3 inches. So we're going to go 3 inches after our bend. It may be different on your boiler, but we're going to make another bend, and it can always be adjusted afterwards. For now, we're going to bend this, my first bend, a little bit more to get it centered in the mounting plate. We're going to slide our insulator on. There we go. Now that you made 2 bends, the insulator is in the bracket, and the main flame rod is sticking straight out. We're going to put our bolt on the bracket and tighten up the bolt so that we are securing the insulator. Now that the insulator is secure, we need to make our main flame rod bend over the front of the burner nozzle. All right, and now for this main flame rod, the flame rod placement is going to be very important, so I'm going to demonstrate with this cutoff. We want about it 2/3 up and approximately right in front of the top holes of these burner nozzles. It's going to end up approximately here, and we want it about 3/16 in front of the nozzle. If the flame rod is touching the metal of the burner nozzle, you're going to be grounding the flame rod and you're not going to be able to get a main flame signal. This flame rod cannot be touching this burner nozzle. So when we bend this main flame rod, we're going to want it to end up approximately right here. So let's go bend it right now. I think these pliers are older than I am. So we made 2 bends. I bent this down slightly and then I made a 90-degree bend. So now we're approximately 2/3 up in front of the burner nozzle. If you do get the rod too close to the burner nozzle, you can always adjust the forward back of this main flame rod with the bends in the back so that you can adjust to approximately have 3/16 gap, which is approximately the gap of this cutoff rod. So it just sneaks in behind here so that we know that this gap is correct. And now we're going to cut off this main flame rod. We only want it covering the end of the one burner nozzle. So now that I've cut it, we're cut flush with the burner nozzle. We are horizontal in front of the main burner nozzle, about 2/3 up, and we're approximately 3/16 in front of the nozzle. That concludes the installation of the main flame rod, the pilot flame rod, and the spark rod on the Sellers S-Series boiler. Hopefully that will fix your intermittent pilot flame failure and main flame issues. You got to have proper spark for proper boiler operation. We need to be able to sense our pilot flame, and we need to sense our main flame. If you have any other questions, you can go to sellersmfg.com and go to the factory tab at the top, and there you can locate your factory rep who will be able to help you with any questions or part needs that you have. If you haven't already, hit the like button and hit the subscribe button to learn more about Sellers Manufacturing products.